John chapter 20, verses 24 through 31. Now Thomas, also known as Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But then he said, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hand and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the door was locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here, see my hand. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas said to him, "My Lord, my God." Then Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of disciples, which are not recorded in the book, but these written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have a life in his name.
Well, good morning. As I said before, my name is Cheeseman, and I'm the youth director. And it is my favorite Sunday of the year because it gives you all a chance to see just how amazing our youth are. And so, on Youth Sunday, like I said, we let them be a part of the sermon, but for fear of making one youth do the whole sermon and putting too much pressure on that one youth, we divide it up. So what you're going to see is almost like a youth group lesson where I'm going to do some teaching and I'm going to ask them questions and let them fill in and really give you a full sermon that way. So let's start by having, oh, you're much closer to me than I thought you were. Surprise. Let's start by having each of you introduce yourselves. Some of your name, your grade, and something fun about you.
My name's Ethan. I'm in 8th grade, and I really love roller coasters.
Nice, I love that. What's your favorite roller coaster?
The puppy scooter at Snoopyland.
Yeah, someday you're going to try the big one, so your mind's going to be blown.
I'm working up to it.
Yeah, you're working up to it. I love it. What about you?
I'm Jack, and I've been to over 10 countries.
Jack, what grade are you in?
Oh, 8th.
Oh, 8th, yes. What's your favorite thing about traveling, Jack?
I like seeing all of the different landmarks around the world.
That's awesome. Thank you. You're up.
My name's Nathan. I'm a sophomore, and I like Marvel. I've seen all the Marvel movies.
That's awesome. Who's your favorite Marvel character?
I really like Spider-Man.
I love that. Me too. All right.
My name's Gabby, and I'm in 8th grade, and I really like Star Wars.
Gabby, who's your favorite Star Wars character?
Probably Hera Syndulla.
I want you to know that when we practiced the first time I asked Gabby that question, there was existential dread. There were just too many great choices, which I love. I think that's awesome. So I actually want to start with an odd anecdote, which is basically me getting us off track before we've even gotten started, really to give you the feel of a youth group lesson. So I grew up in a town that was like a minor tourist destination. And so I have a love-hate relationship with tourist traps, those places that are there to bemuse bored tourists when it's too hot or it's raining at the beach. So, like chains like Madame Tussauds, Wax Museum, or the Hard Rock Cafe. And we had none of these in my small town, but there's one that I think is important for our story today, which is the Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum. Which is, again, a fitting name for our scripture today. These museums are full of fun facts and unbelievable tales and stories. So I asked each of our students to do a little research and find their favorite Ripley's Believe It or Not story to tell you. So why don't you take it away?
So if you haven't heard of this story yet, it's the story of Mike the Headless Chicken. It was a chicken that lived on a farm, and when the farmer went to, the chicken just, stood up and walked away. It lived for 18 more months after its head got chopped off.
They're all that fun. Yeah. Thank you, Ethan.
So we all love April Fool's Day, or maybe not, but some major commercial companies decided to pull their joke a little too far. Believe it or not, Taco Bell in 1996 decided to launch a $3,000 ad campaign across major news companies such as the New York Times and USA Today, claiming that they had now bought the United States Liberty Bell and renamed it the Taco Liberty Bell. As you might guess, some believe this to be true, and the National Park Service spent almost the entire day on the phone.
Yeah. Awesome. You're up.
The one I found was that apparently a nuclear test was conducted on a filing cabinet to test its strength against destroying data. But it can, so your tax dollars at work.
The story I chose from the Ripley's, believe it or not, was the story about the Jim twins. These two twins were separated at birth and didn't know each other until later in their life, but they led very startlingly similar lives. They had the same favorite classes as children, they owned the same type of car, and they even had wives and children with the same names as the others' wives and children.
That's awesome. All right, thank you all for sharing. So we're starting today with unbelievable stories, things that stretch our belief to the very edge, because today's story is all about belief and doubt. And belief and doubt are sort of in a funny place in our world, especially right now. I think in our everyday lives, we experience a world that is kind of very skeptical. I think there are things like AI images or Instagram filters that make it hard for us to know what's real and what's fake. And some healthy skepticism goes a long way in keeping us safe and well-informed, but too much skepticism, like anything, can be detrimental. So my question for you guys is, how do you experience skepticism in your daily lives? Whoever wants to go first.
I think a lot of times there's a lot of skepticism surrounding the news, both like the news on TV or news articles or the newspaper, just because everything's happening as it is in the moment usually, because the news is so, new. And I feel like this can make it harder to believe because it's harder for people to gather facts for something that's happening at the moment. And in addition to that, a lot of times news can be politically biased, so it's hard to see past those things and truly believe what you're reading.
Yeah, that's a good example. I think another is like AI is starting to be used by some people to generate like fake information.
Yeah.
I think, really anything on TV, like it can go through so many levels of editing with all this technology and stuff. But if you go beyond the barrier of screens and phones, you can find skepticism in things that just seem to be too extreme. Like, you might be skeptical about something that is too good or too bad to be true.
Yeah.
I think just to add on to that, an important part is if on social media and on the internet, a government agency could post something and it would look the same way than if a normal person posted something on the internet. So you don't know if what you're saying is exactly true or truly fallacious. You don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. So skepticism alive and well in our society. But doubt, we sort of fear doubt. It can be kind of scary. Doubt makes you feel like you're on the outside looking in. It can be isolating. It's hard to ask questions and be vulnerable enough to say, hey, I'm not sure I'm believing what's going on here. And that's true especially in a religious context. So what does doubt mean to you guys?
Yeah, it's like you said, it's very important in religious context. And, some doubt is healthy, like there's healthy skepticism, but it can go deep and then I go into self-doubt. And really what can turn to there is just fear, like fear that things can't get better, or like you don't know, you doubt what you always knew.
Yeah. Someone else want to chime in? Gabby?
Yeah, I feel like to me doubt is not necessarily, it's not necessarily outright disbelief, but sometimes it's just a gut distrust of something, and when just people aren't totally sure. And I think people experience a lot of doubt today just because our world is so full of connection that we know not everything that we read or we see or we hear can be true, so we don't want to connect some things because we think they might not be. They might fall into that category of not true things.
I think an important part to add on to that is not only is it like a gut distrust of something, but it's personal. People deal with doubt differently, and I think it's important to note that whenever you're thinking about doubt, especially when it comes to a religious context.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Okay,
like
Jack?
you guys said, doubt is something that you can't fully believe in. You can't be certain that something is real or true, but it also comes from a place of not just facts, but also based on what you believe. And that can be based on past experience or a variety of things. But also, people could experience doubt if, subconsciously even, they just don't want to believe in something, so they tell themselves, or they don't really know, but they don't want it to be true. So they experience this doubt because they don't want that one thing to be true.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys. So when trying to sort out what we believe, we get caught in a push and pull between faith and healthy skepticism and real, difficult to manage doubt. And this tension can crop up in places that are much more real than Ripley's Believe It or Not. In fact, the tension rises up for most of us in our darkest times, when we're hurting or struggling. Why do you guys think that times of struggle or difficulty can lead to doubt? Let's start with Jack this time.
So when there's struggle, you know that something is off. So your brain goes into this like defensive mode of distrust. If something is difficult, it's hard to find a way to place faith in it. But also maybe that struggle itself is the reason of the doubt. Because of this difficulty, you can't believe in yourself, like what we talked about earlier. But you could also accumulate doubt about the actual thing that is struggling. Like maybe something isn't fully true or right because it isn't working for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone else?
Yeah.
You can go.
Oh, I think it's because you overall feel more vulnerable when you're hurting or you're having a struggle. And I think a lot of times that can lead to people not wanting to let things in because there's a possibility that said things can be false and lead to even more hurt or having your hopes crushed. And I think that can add on to the emotional difficulty. So a lot of times people just shut things out.
Yeah, Ethan?
I think a good analogy for struggling is like juggling. When you're having to deal with multiple different problems at once, you're juggling a bunch of balls, and whenever you also have to add faith into that in something that you can't fully prove, it's hard to know if it's true or not because you're already dealing with the problems that you're having.
Hard to keep everything
that
in
you're
the air.
multitasking. Yeah.
Yeah. Very good. And I saved the best for last. So Nathan, why don't you tell us?
All right, so when I think of struggling leading to doubt, I think of the movie Spider-Man 2. So in that movie, Peter Parker is riddled with doubt. He doubts his powers, his purpose. He's lost. His life is falling apart. And even though he tries to help people, it constantly feels like the universe is punishing him for it. And it leads him to doubt himself, and his doubt spirals until he gives up being Spider-Man. You know, you just sort of lose yourself in your doubt, you know, who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a Spider-Man answer, his small group in the front row and motioning to. Pretty typical for Nathan. Yes. They all nodded, I promise. Yeah, but that's a really good example of the way that, dealing with difficulty, it just piles up. It's like you're juggling, and eventually it's hard to hold on to all those things all at once. So we're starting here with doubt in the midst of struggle or mourning, because that's exactly where we meet Thomas in the story from today. Can you all tell me a little bit about Thomas in the story? What's going on with him? Where is he emotionally in the story?
So Thomas was one of the disciples, and this story takes place like right after he died, and
Jesus died, not Thomas.
Yeah, Jesus. Sorry.
That's okay. We got it. We're with
by,
you.
By he, I meant Jesus.
Yeah.
Right after Jesus died, Thomas wasn't there whenever Jesus came back. All the other disciples were there, and Jesus was like, "Hey guys, I'm back." But Thomas wasn't there. He was grieving alone. And then the disciples are like, "You're not gonna believe this, but he's back." And he's like, "No, you're not telling the truth." So he's really conflicted in the story.
Yeah. Someone want to add to that?
yeah, he's like things aren't going to plan. You know, he's devoted his life to Jesus. He did good work, and he watched him die a horrible, horrible death.
Yeah.
You know, he doubts because he's afraid that the Jewish leaders might come for him next as well. You know, and his fear causes him to doubt God's purpose for him. His doubt goes so far, he even doubts the power of God.
Yeah, I think since he was one of Jesus' disciples, I mean, him and Jesus were really close friends, and since he had to watch him die, I mean, that puts him in such a vulnerable, grieving state, and I think that means, like we were discussing earlier, that he doesn't want to let anything end because he doesn't want to be hurt even more.
Yeah, absolutely.
He had already kind of accepted the fact that his teacher and leader had died. So now when Jesus comes back, he does have a lot of doubt about the situation, especially since people just normally don't come back from the dead. You don't see a lot of people walking around with 9 lives. It would be like if someone you knew and loved died, and then 3 days later your friends are telling you that they actually came back to life. Yeah, you might be a little skeptical, especially if you think it is a not-so-funny prank.
It's a little creepy.
Yeah. So Thomas is obviously mourning Jesus. That's something you guys mentioned. He's wrapped up in grief. He's also sort of wrapped up in his fear and his isolation, and that's all leading to this doubt that he's feeling. And all of that also leads to him missing that first appearance of Jesus, right? Mm-hmm. So what's Thomas's relationship with the other disciples after he expresses his doubt? Peter comes to him. He's like, "Hey, we've seen Jesus," and Thomas is like, I don't really know that I believe that. What's their relationship like after that?
The disciples stand by Thomas. It's not like they abandon him and they're like, "You're wrong, and we're leaving you behind because of that." The disciples stand by Thomas and support him because they understand what he's going through.
It's relatable.
What'd you say?
It's relatable for them.
How so?
Because they just recently went through this, since they saw Jesus for the first time after he died right before Thomas did. So they'd already kind of went through this experience themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, and I think that as we've said, Thomas is isolating himself here, and he's denying that Jesus is alive because it's like the friend analogy, like it could be a prank.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he's pushing them away, but the disciples are aware of this. When someone tries to push you away, you gotta hold on tighter. So they're standing with him.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I think in a lot of situations, like an event like this that's so meaningful in a not so good way I take that. It was meaningful in a good way, but it certainly didn't feel good to the disciples. And I think a lot of situations like this can really put a lot of stress on friendships, like what the disciples had with each other. But instead they grew closer because they had this empathy with what the others were going through. So they accepted the fact that Thomas was grieving a bit differently than the rest of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Gabby's already kind of answered this question, but do you guys think that Thomas's doubt changed his relationship with the other disciples?
Absolutely not.
In what way do you mean that?
They don't abandon him. They stick with him and they help him through it.
Yeah, they're still friends. They still stick together. Yeah.
I would actually disagree with that. I would say that it did change. I would say it actually got stronger because of this.
Oh, why do you think so, Jack?
Because this is just another example of them sticking together through hard times. So because of this, they grew a stronger relationship with each other.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with that they grow stronger. It's just like Batman says, if you persevere, you can find the strength to grow stronger.
I knew one superhero reference was coming. I was not ready for the second one. I love it, though. It's great. Through perseverance, you grow stronger. That should be in the Bible or something.
Batman's Bible.
The joke is that is in the Bible. I don't know if any of you got that. And I think something that's in your answers that I would add is that it's the vulnerability of sharing doubt that made that relationship stronger, and that let them persevere through that and grow stronger. Gabby, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think,
She
just what I said earlier.
She already answered it.
Yeah, I know, you were ahead. All right, I just want to make sure everyone's getting a chance to speak. Nathan threw me off a little bit there. All right, so Thomas's doubt and grief is accepted, and it's treated with love and grace by the disciples. It gives us a model for how we are supposed to live when people in our communities express doubt. And we do a good job of offering safe places for people to share and express doubt. I think that Grief Share is one of those places and is a necessary place for that. I would hope that youth group is one of those places like that for you guys. And I know that all of our discipleship classes are places where people can come and share that doubt and grow through that in real, true, meaningful ways. So the disciples give us a great example of the disciples give us a great example of what to do when those around us are doubting. But there's more going on here. This is not, I'm giving you a fresh question.
Pop quiz.
Pop quiz. What do you feel like Thomas, what can we learn from the way that Thomas doubts? What can we do like Thomas when we are experiencing doubt?
I think you have to just remember in the back of your mind that things are going to be okay, that you got to stop doubting and believe, as Jesus says.
Hey, you got to remember that things are going to be okay. Having that little bit of hope is great. Yeah.
I think we can learn that faith is a place where it's necessary to ask questions, even the tough ones.
Yeah, we can learn that faith is a place where we have to ask questions, even tough ones. Yeah.
I think it's important to notice that Thomas deals with his grief by being alone, and that leads to even more doubt. I think you could skip it all together and realize that being with other people and connecting with other people can help solve that in a lot of ways.
Yeah, you can go to community, you can connect with other people. Jack, you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was kind of agreeing with Ethan,
Tag team.
not just not just learning from Thomas and how he dealt with the doubt, but also how his friends dealt with his doubt, and how you can be a friend to someone when they're in that doubting experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Great answers. Good job. Great job with the pop quiz. And so I want to move to the last part of this story, which might be the most important part of this story, is that in the midst of Thomas's doubt, he doesn't go through it alone. He's with his community, but even more important than that is that Jesus comes to Thomas. Jesus meets him where he's at. And this is actually an important theme throughout the Gospel of John. Jesus comes to us and brings us closer to who God really is. So my question is, briefly, what are some other examples from the Gospel of John of Jesus reaching out to people?
I'd say the one that comes to mind is Lazarus, In a way, it's very similar to Thomas' it's a story where Mary, like Thomas, is grieving after Lazarus' death. But Jesus reaches out to her and shows her that, God's power is infinite and can do anything, even bringing a man back from the dead.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone else?
I think the story of Jesus healing the blind man, I think it showed that he met everyone where they were at, not just the people who were privileged or the people who were considered the higher up people in society, because this man was in one of the more ostracized groups of society, yet Jesus still treated him like an equal and helped him.
Yeah, absolutely. Jack or Ethan?
So part of Nicodemus' story is he was a rabbi, a Jewish teacher, and part of it was he was unsure about how you could be born again physically, because that isn't really possible. But Jesus kind of reaches out and he was kind of doubting that, and Jesus kind of reaches out and assures him that, the quote we know, who believes in him shall have eternal life, and kind of sharing that if you believe in the Spirit, then you can be born again. And benefit.
Absolutely.
Whenever I was picking out the story, I picked the most well-known story out of the Bible, the walking on water story. In case you guys didn't know, the disciples were heading across the Sea of Galilee, and ginormous storm. They're like, ah! And they see Jesus out in the sea. They're looking out, giant storm. They see him out there, and he's like, "It is I. I'm here to help you guys." And they let him aboard their ship. He comforts them and reaches out to them, and the storm goes away, and they get home.
Yeah. So the Gospel of John has all these stories about Jesus reaching out to people in all of these different contexts. We can't handle doubt that comes in the midst of trial or difficulty because we, like Thomas, also struggle to deal with our grief. And this story is as much about grief and isolation that Thomas feels as it is about his doubt. So in the midst of Thomas's grief and doubt, Jesus reaches out to Thomas, just like Jesus reached out in all of these other stories. And this mirrors the opening of John in chapter 1, where Jesus moves into the neighborhood, as the message says, meeting us where we're at so that we may better see and know who God is. And that's why I think the gospel writer includes verses 30 and 31 immediately after the story. This is what he says. Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples that are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may continue to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and through believing you may have life in his name. Jesus is our means of seeing who God really is. And that's why in the midst of our doubt, it's Jesus who reaches out to us. It's the whole point of John's gospel. So when we doubt or wrestle with grief or isolation, Jesus still finds us today, but not as a ghost like in this story or in Ripley's Believe It or Not, but in many other ways. So this is the last question I have for you guys. How or when or where has Jesus shown up in your life for you?
I think Jesus is always there when I connect with others, whether I'm helping others or when others are helping me. I remember a notable time with that is when I went on the mission trip a few years ago, and just like when I connected with other people over faith, and just being able to be God's hands and feet is really a good way, like, to see Jesus when you work. And then also just having other people in that mission trip, it was so great because I got to experience both sides. Other people, like, we would lift each other up through various ways. We would talk during the evening devotionals, and I felt like that was a way when we could share God's story with each other that Jesus was very present.
Absolutely.
I have seen Jesus' love through people, the love that people have shown me, regardless of whether or not I feel like I deserve it or not. And I can't even think of a single good one because it has happened so many times before. Regardless of whether I feel like I deserve it or not, people still give me that same amount of love that they would give me if I did deserve it. And I feel like that shows Jesus' love greatly.
Absolutely. Jack, Nathan?
I think that there are just certain situations in which you can trust Jesus to help ease your doubt. But on top of that, Jesus shows up to me in just simple acts of love and compassion, even the smallest things. It's just a reminder of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I have a bit of a different answer.
Yeah, go
if
for
you
it.
didn't know, my parents have a very small role in the church.
Yes, just a little one.
Yeah. So I've never really had like a story where I had like a big conversion to Christianity moment, but I've felt Jesus in different smaller ways. You know, like the burning bush doesn't happen very often, but if you think God's not speaking, then listen harder. So yeah. I've felt Jesus in happy moments and comfort in tough times and good grades after finals, but especially in community and the youth group.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all for sharing. I appreciate you doing that. All right, so this is what I want to end on. To all of you and to all of you, Jesus is reaching out to us. He's calling to us. He's meeting us where we're at and comforting us in the midst of whatever doubt or fear or suffering we might be struggling through. Let's pray. Dear God, thank you for Thomas and his story. Thank you for giving us an example of what doubt looks like in a faith community, of how we can rally around those who might be struggling, help them see you in new ways. God, thank you for giving us Thomas as an example of how to ask tough questions, how to be vulnerable with those who are close to us so that we might better know and see you. And God, thank you for these youths, for giving them the voice to share your word, to bring your message to this congregation. God, in your name we pray. Amen. Awesome. Thank you, guys.